This from Graeme, who says if a facial recognition camera is set up at a concert, that could attract criminals and is loaded with criminal faces the police are out to spot, then it's acceptable. However, if a van is trained on protesters with the object of collecting faces for future use, then it's an intrusion on our freedom as the police. They can always then choose when and where to collect faces. That is a good point, isn't it? Because you could end up with a situation, if you go to a lot of protests, which is your absolute right to do so, then you could be flagged on the database for no other reason than you were previously at a protest, doing nothing wrong. It's a professional agitator. And then the next protest, there he is again, maybe we'll nick that one. I don't know. These are the genuine questions that we have to ask. The Home Office is set to deploy facial recognition across the UK to catch criminals. Measures to help curb crime is the argument for it, or is this an Orwellian breach of privacy? We've got some great guests coming on this. First, let's speak with Dr. Luke Roberts, Professor for the Centre of Science and Policy, University of Cambridge. Luke, good afternoon to you.
Hi, nice to meet you. Yes, pleasure to be here.
And lovely to have you with us. So, I mean, this is always we always try not to go down the Orwellian rabbit hole, but you can't really help yourself in these kind of conversations. It's almost written for us. There is the state, and it's got facial recognition cameras. Some would say it's just the natural organic nature of technology. It's always moving. Fingerprints were probably controversial once upon a time. And yet here we are in the 21st century with a new way of catching criminals. What's wrong with that? Is there anything to fear, do you sense?
I think the challenge with technology, as you rightly said, is whether it's DNA or fingerprint technology. Sometimes there's this blind faith that the technology can now solve everything. And if we've learned nothing most recently from the post office scandal, which is that having blind faith in the technology without governance structures, without the ability to scrutinise what is happening, puts people at risk. And I think it may sound very simplistic to say, well, if you haven't done anything wrong, you've got nothing to worry about. But at the moment, we don't know how the data has been trained. We do know that AI likes to do pattern recognition. So the stronger certain patterns become, the more likely it is to flag them. And we also don't have much of an understanding of how this will affect the future of policing either. Does it change the dynamics and the relationships between police officers and the public?
That's a very good point. And of course, as I mentioned a second ago, how it's used. If nobody's going to argue, and I mentioned it right at the very beginning, with a headline that says, look, we put the cameras out there, made 580 arrests, including 52 registered sex offenders who breached their conditions. Now, naturally, most people go, well, that's fantastic. That's clearly a great implementation of this technology. A lot of areas where people are concerned about, and we're getting a lot of traction on email and text on this afternoon, are things like protesting, where you could find yourself on a database just for being at a protest, and then, lo and behold, you pop up on the next one because you're on a database.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is why we really need to think through what is the level of scrutiny around this technology between the technology companies and the police, and where does the public or representatives of the public, not just police and crime commissioners, step in to offer some of those safeguards and some of those assurances, because AI is not foolproof. It does hallucinate. It does make things up from time to time as well. So this this dependence on just these two things, the technology companies and the police, without some form of ethical and public scrutiny, becomes really important. Partly for the very reason you've said, which is I might be flagged by the technology to have done something that I haven't done, but also importantly, that we know that the technology discriminates against certain groups and certain types of people. So again, who does some of the safeguarding and reassuring that that won't happen? Yeah,
I mean, I heard arguments that, and this may be a little conspiratorial, I don't know, Luke, maybe you can help me out on this, but back in, 2010, whatever it was, Theresa May was the Home Secretary. She was seen as being, on the right of the Conservative Party, and there she was, getting rid of 20,000 police officers. That seemed really strange. And then similar things have happened, and what we see sometimes as a wholly inept response to criminality, shoplifting, etc. I've heard this sort of overarching argument that the reason why the state, let's just use that phrase for the purpose of this, is quite relaxed about things, if that's the right word, is because coming around the corner is stuff like this They know full well, give it 10 years, facial recognition, voice recognition, goodness knows what else. You won't be able to commit a crime because technology and AI will be doing it for us. Is there any truth in that? Because it feels a bit like that sometimes.
I think it's a very powerful narrative that politicians get very attracted to. And I think the problem with that narrative is twofold. Firstly, as I said previously, who has scrutiny of the technology and when does the public get to intervene in the conversation? So in around, I think it was around 2018 or 2019, King's Cross in London did facial recognition with their cameras, but didn't tell anyone. So we were all being recorded. And so no ethics there at all. And there was nothing really from the Police and Crime Commissioner of London at the time to say, like, do we need to stop and actually think about this? So again, I think that's the danger of technology leading politicians. But I think the second part is that whatever we do, we can't think of the countermeasures that people will start to take. So do we then, like, take a picture of somebody else and walk around with that as a mask on, if we don't understand how the technology is used, but also how people try and counteract it? And I think that the seduction of a surveillance society, which is what we're really talking about here, is it only works in terms of if you're already on the database. And so
Indeed.
by assuming that people who have committed a first-time offence then don't come up anywhere in this software. And so the danger is you just reinforce inequality and discrimination.
And there was some racial bias, I think, in those original tests, which you'll be aware of. Apparently that's been ironed out. But look, watch this space, I guess. Listen, Luke, we have to stop there for time, but you've been great. We will speak again. Dr. Luke Roberts, Professor at the University of Cambridge in that area of the Centre of Science and Policy. Let's get a word from our friend Alan Miller, co-founder of the Together Declaration, an area when it comes to privacy in our lives and government snooping. Alan, I know you feel very strongly about this, but look, you've got a nice, kind face. What's wrong with somebody taking a big, fat photograph of it?
Well, there's a number of issues, Ian, with this situation. We've seen that already retrospectively. There's tens of thousands of searches being used. We saw one every 2 minutes recently that police forces were doing. So whilst this is now being instructed by the Home Office, this has already been done. There was no manifesto saying these things would be done. Clearview were fined £7.5 million for scraping all our data from Facebook and other platforms. They're often mismatches. We know that there are data breaches. Look, they can't even protect our own service people in Afghanistan and spies. The idea that they could prevent data breaches for some of these things is ludicrous as well. But we've got genuine issues with just tracking and privacy, and the idea that ordinary citizens, everyday citizens, are not suspects. We should be entitled to enjoy our own privacy, even in public spaces, unfettered, not being scanned, not being monitored, not being surveyed consistently and tracked. And we're increasingly seeing that. And that's why digital ID, alongside this facial recognition, is all part of what we need with the Digital Bill of Rights to say, we can't have these ever-encroaching measures without clarity. So, for instance, at the moment, the police can go to a passport database, but they have to ask the government every single time. We've got precedents around things like listening on phones and looking at the mail, if people still get mail. But we need those ring-fenced protections from the point of view of our liberties, privacy and rights in the same way in this fast evolving arena. We love technology. It can really transform our lives in positive ways. The problem is, Ian, we've got some technocrats that think that most people are not much good, that if you ask questions about borders or about migration or about lockdowns, that perhaps you shouldn't be saying those things, perhaps you should be behind bars, you certainly should be censored and shut down. We've seen it with the Rapid Response Unit, the Counter Disinformation Unit. We weren't able to know about all that till we saw the lockdown files and the Twitter files. And we've got a situation where many boast about the exciting times of a central bank digital currency, tracking everyone, no cash, everyone on camera, facial recognition. The Met itself has got tens of thousands in each borough of the public being scanned regularly. Now, the argument will always be made, well, if it can stop one bad incident, surely that's the reason to do it. But if we transform society to be one where we've got a dystopian biometric state, remember, it wasn't that long ago they were saying you've all got to get a vaccine passport to come in and out of places. You have to have a mandatory procedure, which now we found out subsequently that couldn't really stop you getting something, with COVID, and and then they're all, oops, we lost 45,000 care workers. But it was all being tagged together around, guess who? Tony Blair's insistence we all need previously national ID, then digital ID, and pushing that situation. It doesn't take a genius to say, well, I'm protesting, I'm saying some things on social media. We've seen Lucy Connolly in there. I don't like this biometric state. You're being tracked. You're going to a protest. I was just down in Bournemouth talking to some people. They're being called white supremacists and far-right racists. These are grandparents who are saying we're concerned about our local area and safety, right? They're not saying anything about colour. They don't care what colour the people are. But you see this in a situation where the state and police and two-tier policing and then two-tier policing with facial recognition and targeting certain kinds of people and making us all potential criminals is very concerning. That's why we need a digital Bill of Rights, and we're insisting on it. We'd love your viewers to support that, Ian.
Listen, where can people look, Alan, to find out more on supporting that?
Yeah, they can go to togetherdeclaration.org or at TogetherDec online, and you can see us there. Thank you.
You're always brilliant, Alan. Thank you very much indeed. That's Alan Miller, co-founder of the Together Declaration. I think what he said there is the crucial bit, but it's not the easiest argument to win when you're faced with the other arguments, which are, with digital ID, people, because I can see the convenience of digital ID. If somebody says you can have your passport, your driver, everything in your phone, oh boy, does that appeal to my OCD. But the bit that it doesn't appeal to more so is my relationship with the state. And I think that's the issue with this, isn't it? And again, people always go, well, if it catches bad guys, I mentioned that data from the Met when they tried this out and caught 580 arrests over 12 months, including 52 registered sex offenders. Now, you hear that, and a lot of people, I think, perhaps even most people would say, well, that's good, right? You've done nothing wrong. What's the problem? But it's intrinsically about the relationship between the citizen and the state. The citizen to go about their lawful business without the idea that the state is tracking their every move in case of X, Y, Z, stuff that is unlikely to happen. That's crucial to the basic freedoms of individuals, right? But it's a hard argument when somebody goes, so you don't want to catch 52 sex offenders. What's it from a policing perspective, of course? This is on the increase. This is the announcement today from the Home Office. Let's meet with Graeme Wetone, former police officer and author of How to Be a Police Officer. Regularly helps us out with these kind of stories. Graeme, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Ian.
I was saying to our first guest, the professor from Cambridge, I'm sure once upon a time somebody somewhere would have mounted a campaign against fingerprints, probably under the same issue of privacy. We previously had suggestions of a national DNA database. That hasn't quite seen the light of day for similar reasons. Is there good reason why citizens should be concerned about essentially the state lobbing cameras all over the place to film them just in case they're a wrong 'un?
I think there's understandable concerns, but there's an awful lot of misinformation about live facial recognition. The system itself uses images that have been taken from police custody centres. So if you've never been into a police station, never had your image taken at a custody suite, you're not on the database. Because it's a live facial recognition system, it doesn't retain the images it takes out on the street, so you're not going to be held on any database anywhere. It's basically scanning for people that have been into the police system and are now wanted for essentially serious offences. You mentioned those numbers earlier on from the Met, about 50-odd people being identified. I think South Wales Police have been running this since about 2019. They've had no false identifications. So the technology has gone on leaps and bounds. I first saw this around 2005 when we used like a recorded system to look at images coming back from Carnival. So we'd play like a videotape of it and it would pick out some people. But there were clear issues then with identification. So they went back to the drawing board. Here we are 20 years later and they've refined it significantly. So it's now almost beyond mistakes.
But almost. It does throw up though, doesn't it, the state versus citizen relationship? Not unreasonably. I mean, there's a debate there, if nothing else.
Yeah, there is, understandably. And as you said, previous guest and me, we're having that debate. I think actually now the system is so refined and the safeguards that the police are using it under are much better. If you think about when you walk into London, you're on CCTV systems on the underground, in stores, in shopping centres, everywhere you go, you're being recorded, and you don't really know what happens to that. The police work under significant safeguards, and there's even more safeguards coming into place. So they don't retain the images. Images are only checked, as I said, against the police database, and then it only comes up if it identifies you. And even at that stage, a police officer will come out and talk to you and either confirm or deny that identification on the street.
We had this message in from Jane. Says, if a copper sat in a van with a bunch of photos of scumbags and looked in the street for these people, would we be as concerned? Which is kind of the point you're making, really, Graeme, that it's just a tech digital version of that.
Do you know, I worked on a public order branch for many years. We used to have literally almost like, and even on the street as a response officer, we occasionally would have images of people that were wanted. On briefings, I think the most we ever give was 6 to 10 pieces of information, including like images of people that were wanted for something. After about 6 images, you start to forget who the first one was. So this is literally a step on from me driving around the street with either someone's picture or photograph on the dashboard. It's much more refined. It's much better for the police officers and the public. We talk about the eyes and ears. This is literally eyes and ears. You can't expect police officers to have a digital memory of everybody that's wanted for some sort of serious offence, even the sex offenders who are breaching their conditions. As an officer, I can't be expected to know all 50 sex offenders in my area and be able to recognise them on the street. This system does that. It makes the public safer. Listen,
Graeme, as ever, thank you. Always good to gauge an expert policing view. It's very hard to argue against the points that Graeme made there. Graeme Wetone, former police officer, many decades experience, and certainly at the coalface of areas such as this, public order and being aware of trying to find a wrong un. So it streamlines it, it's simpler, it's only a database of people that are already wrong-uns that the cameras would be looking at. So what have you got to worry? Precedent, tipping point, thin end of the wedge, relationship with the state, it's that kind of stuff. Freedom to live without anyone filming you.